Today, I'm announcing that the United States will be sending 31 Abrams tanks to Ukraine. It is not an offensive threat to Russia. There is no offensive threat to Russia.
Ukraine received a huge boost today in its fight against Russian forces. The U.S. is sending dozens of M1 Abrams tanks. That decision came just hours after a major announcement in Berlin.
Richtig, und es ist richtig.
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz says his country is sending 14 of its own Leopard 2 tanks. And that's not all. Berlin is also giving allied countries who have the German-made tanks the green light to send them to Ukraine too. Kiev has been asking for tanks since the war began, but those pleas increased in intensity in recent weeks as Ukraine prepares for a fresh Russian offensive. Sabine Sparwasser is Germany's ambassador to Canada. Ambassador, thank you very much for speaking with us today. It is a very significant day. I want to start by asking you, how did Germany get to a yes on tanks?
Well, the Chancellor announced it today. We are going to give Ukraine significant further assistance with main battle tanks. That's a next step in the Allied support for Ukraine in the defense of its sovereignty and freedom. And it is a big decision to take, and it's one that we haven't taken lightly. And it's one that we have taken, as we've done all of the decisions along the way, in accordance and in cooperation and coordination with our allies. Because I think that is the strongest message we can send in the defense of Ukraine and against the Russian aggression. We are united. We're doing it together. We're going every step of the way together. And that step today means Germany is sending Leos. Other countries are joining in. We're going to do it in a coordinated effort that also will be significant and significant enhancement of the capabilities that Ukraine has to defend itself.
How did Germany get to that decision, though? Was it trying to ensure that everyone remains on that united front? Was that a big factor in the decision?
It is a big factor for us to not go alone, to go with our allies, to go with our friends. This has been a mantra of our foreign policy, actually, since the foundation of the Federal Republic of Germany. But in particular, when it came to helping Ukraine in its plight, last year, beginning with the 24th of February, we have always coordinated every step of the way what the next level of help is going to be. And we're doing it now. And as I said, we're sending Leo tanks, which are Leo 2, which are the most modern main battle tanks that exist in the world.
Given your role here in Ottawa, I have to ask, have you had any conversations with Canadian officials? Are they making an ask to prepare to get permission to send Canadian tanks in?
Well, I speak for Germany only. I'm sure that there's a lot of thinking about it. We are coordinating very closely with the Canadians as well. In Ramstein, Minister Anand was a part of all the debates and discussion. As I said, we are marching in lockstep now. And other countries, President Biden has just announced in Washington that they're delivering the Abrams tanks. So a lot of strong allies are bringing their capacities together in order to support Ukraine.
But have Canadian officials reached out to you or their colleagues in Berlin, perhaps, to say, hey, this is something we're thinking about. We're going to seek permission. We want to send these Canadian-owned but German-made tanks as well?
They have not reached out to me, but I wouldn't be the person to be able to talk about it.
Fair enough. I have to ask. How soon will these Leopard 2 tanks start arriving in Ukraine? Is there a time frame laid out here yet?
Yeah, our Minister of Defense announced that we hope to deliver the first ones end of March, which is probably timely because everybody in the military field sees that there might be another offensive of Russia in preparation. So to help Ukraine fast, and not just with the main battle tanks. And I should add that we are also providing many other things in support of Ukraine. One of the most important ones are air defenses. the city of Kiev has been protected against much of Russian attacks by a German system. We're now delivering, it's called IRIS-T. We're now delivering Patriot systems to Ukraine. We're delivering also infantry tanks. So it's a huge package. And by now, Germany is actually the second largest donor to Ukraine. So we're very steadfast in our support. And we're going to continue, as the Chancellor has said, as long as it takes.
Something that you and a number of different NATO allies have very much pointed out, and you did it just a short time ago, is that allies are moving in lockstep. Everyone is doing things together. Canada is still making its decision. The Prime Minister said today he has nothing to announce today. We know that there are conversations behind the scenes happening. Would you welcome Canada if Canada makes that decision to, or do you think Canada should contribute tanks?
I think everybody has to make their own decisions. I'm speaking here for Germany. As I say, we have very close and excellent relations in every field, including security, with Canada.
What is the concern here about how Russia might retaliate to this response or to this addition of this kind of weaponry?
Well, there is obviously from the partners who are engaged in helping Ukraine, there is always kind of a worry or we do want to make sure that we are not drawn into the conflict as parties. But it is also very clear in international law when a country is attacked in the way that Ukraine has been attacked by Russia, it is very legal and right for countries, friendly countries, to support them in any way they can. So there is the Article 51 of the UN Charter that allows us to do the kind of things that we're doing, and we're doing just that.
What kind of difference do you think these tanks from Germany and from NATO allies, what kind of difference do you think that they're going to make to Ukraine?
I think they mean a really enhanced capacity to be moving fast, to be also not allowing Russia to steadily advance and to make it much, much more difficult for it to plan the way it wants to further attack Ukraine. So I think it is a significant enhancement, which is why we're doing it.
Do you have any idea of where support goes from here? Do you foresee that there's going to be a next level, an increase in the weaponry or whatever it is Ukraine needs? Is there any sort of idea as to what comes next after tanks?
Well, I wouldn't have thought. Who would have thought that this would be happening on the 24th of February last year? Who would have thought we would all be speaking about sending tanks into battle in Europe? I can't possibly predict what the next steps are, but we do want to do absolutely everything to help Ukraine to stay free and sovereign. And this is a very important step.
On that reflection point, we're coming up to getting closer to the 1 year since Russia launched this invasion. Yeah. When you talk about that and put that into context about tanks rolling in Europe, what does it make you think? It was unthinkable. You know, I've been 40 years in the Foreign Service, and most of the time things just got better. We got more peaceful, more integrated. We lived through the fall of the wall, which was the happiest moment of German history, and we all thought, we now know we can live in peace with our neighbors. To have this happen, to have Russia do what it did, is a huge shock to all of us, but in particular to Germany, who thought these times were fully behind Europe. And Germany has totally changed its foreign and security policy. We are changing the way we see our energy policy, our dependencies in terms of supply chains. So this is, for my country, this is a point where we have put everything into question, and we're changing totally. And the tanks are part of that. Those are all of my questions, Ambassador. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much, Katie.
Ukraine and the U.S. are sending tanks to Ukraine. Will Canada follow suit?
I won't be making an announcement today, but I can tell you we are looking very, very closely at what more we can do to support Ukraine.
Sources tell CBC News that the Canadian Army is considering sending Ukraine 4 Leopard 2 tanks. But one retired general I spoke with before this news broke says Canada could send even more. Here to dig into this story is retired General Rick Hillier. He previously served as Chief of the Defense Staff for the Canadian military. General Hillier is now chair of the Ukrainian World Congress's Strategic Advisory Council. The council oversees the procurement of military equipment for Ukraine's armed forces. Thank you so much for speaking with us. I'd like to start by asking whether Canada should follow the lead of Germany and the U.S. and send tanks to Ukraine.
Well, I just approach it, Katie, from the general sense and say Canada, like every other nation in the West, every democratic nation should do everything possible to make sure that Ukraine wins this war. In my view, this war will end in victory, and we've got to make sure it's Ukraine's, that democratic nation, not Russia's, that dictators. And so I think Canada can do more every single time. I support what they've done with the air defense and with some of the other things, but I think we could actually do more. And on the tank front, I'd love to see Canada follow Germany, follow the United States, follow perhaps Poland and maybe even some other nations, and offer up some Leopard 2s in our case to Ukraine so that they can win this war.
We spoke with Andrew Leslie, the retired Lieutenant General, last week, and he suggested that the Canadian tanks are in poor shape, at least some of them. What is your understanding of the condition of tanks?
Well, look, we've heard so much about the poor operational readiness of the Canadian forces right now. The CDS has mused publicly about their lack of ability to be ready for missions like this. We know the spare parts are just not there, and the tanks, many of the tanks and other fighting vehicles are broken up against a fence. But we could probably put out 50 Leopard 2 tanks. We could go get some spare parts from the Germans, who now have agreed to allow Leopards to be provided. They've got spare parts and inventory. We could buy some, get, say, 50 tanks into Poland, train and assist in training the Ukrainians up on those, and then get them into Ukraine to, like you say, to fight the battles of late winter, early spring, and this summer, and make sure they're not going to lose this war against Russia. So I think we could do it. Many of the tanks are in poor condition, but we can make sure they're operational, ready to go for the Ukrainians. It would cost us some effort, certainly, but I'd like to see it happen.
So what would happen to Canada in terms of combat readiness if, say, your suggestion, sending 50 tanks over there, if they require some parts, require some repairs? It's my understanding that we have something around 82 of these tanks in different variations of it. What does that do to Canadian armed forces and how it leaves us in terms of being a country that is combat ready?
Well, first of all, we're not combat ready. I mean, let's face it. The Canadian forces have deteriorated to a stage of not being ready for any major mission anywhere around the world. And that is common knowledge. And I think the CDS, and in fact, has alluded to that throughout there. I think, Katie, we bought, when I was the Chief of Defense Staff and Gord O'Connor was the Minister of Defense, we bought 100 Leopard 2 tanks. I think we still have them all. So look, taking 50 out now, we don't have enough people to man them all or to crew them all. And so taking those tanks out would not change anything that we're doing at this point in time. But then I would make it a two-step process. And I would say, look, give those tanks, and then automatically let's go to Germany and let's say, replace those 50 tanks, never mind that, replace the 100 Leopard tanks with the latest tank that you're building, and let's re-equip the Canadian forces as a secondary step, and let's commit to it right away. Do
you think the Canadian government, there's the political will to do that, and B, the money?
Well, first of all, I'll tell you that the opposition to any move like this will come from within the Canadian Armed Forces. And the reason they will oppose giving up their tanks is nobody has any faith that the Canadian government would take that second step. I would say, look, convince those men and women in uniform and their commanders and Canadians that you're going to do that. Announce it. Announce that you're going to fast track it. Go buy the latest German tank, the Panther. Get Krauss-Maffei to make it in Canada if necessary, or give us the sort of industrial benefits aside from that, and let's re-equip the Canadian forces. But convince those men and women and reduce the opposition to doing what Ukraine, in their hour of greatest need, now needs us to do.
So what do you think the public conversation should be in this country when it comes to backstopping? If Canada is going to match what other countries are doing and make a contribution when it comes to tanks, what should the public be aware of, and what should the government be thinking about in terms of backstopping?
Listen, we've had a wake-up call this past year. The world is not a peaceful place. There are a lot of horrible, terrible people out there like Putin, and they will do things which we don't like, and we've got to be prepared with our friends and allies and with NATO particularly to refuse to let them do those kinds of things. And that means we've got to have a solid and strong armed forces. That means we've got to invest in it. We've got to sort out our procurement system, which in my view is broken, and we've got to get the kinds of equipment and then the numbers of people that we need and get the training done so that we have a capable force and we're not viewed by NATO as that parasite that they viewed us for so long, and that we actually have capability to help defend our freedoms, our interests around the world, and be part of NATO. And I would just say there's a huge reason to contribute right now, just because we've got to be part of the NATO effort. Just think of what would happen and what Canada would do if all of a sudden Russia was doing something up near the North Pole or in our far north. We would be screaming for NATO assistance. So now, while that's not occurring, let's make sure that we're part of NATO and we're seen as a full partner here. So let's do something like this. And if we're going to do it, go big or go home.
While Canada does not meet the defense spending threshold of 2% of GDP, I have done multiple interviews with a number of different NATO allies, and all have offered, congratulations and thanks to Canada for being a part of this effort. Is it your position that NATO views Canada as a parasite?
I think NATO's viewed Canada as a parasite for decades, quite frankly. I think the other NATO members have been thankful for what Canada has done in this effort to help Ukraine. I myself give a thumbs up to the government of Canada for the purchase of the air defense system. I'd like to see them now announce that same purchase for the Canadian Armed Forces. I think what we've done with those armored vehicles is a good thing. That's not a war changer. And I think we've done some other things, including the artillery and the ammunition, that I just give them a thumbs up for. Well, we need to be part of that NATO effort in a greater way possible. And I just urge the government of Canada to step up even more. And now is a great opportunity to do it.
Retired General Rick Hillier, thank you for your time today.
Katie, my pleasure. Thank you.
We're going to take a break, but first,
Thank you.